All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to talk about something huge, a problem that costs businesses, well, a fortune. It's the spectacular failure of strategic plans. I mean, from the biggest boardrooms all the way down to the local corner store, you see these great ideas on paper that just never seem to happen in the real world. So let's figure out why.
So let's start with a question you've probably asked yourself, maybe sitting in a meeting. Why do so many corporate strategies feel, well, exactly the same? You know that feeling, right? You see the new plan and it's kind of vague, it's packed with buzzwords, and it sounds almost identical to the last one, and maybe even your competitors. What is going on there?
Well, this huge problem actually has a name, and getting a handle on it is, the first step to actually fixing it. It's called the strategy dilution trap. And honestly, it's the root cause of why so many plans that seem great on paper just fall apart before they even get off the ground. Okay, so what exactly is this trap? Well, you can think of it as this really toxic combination of two things. First, you start with a super bland, generic vision statement. You know, the kind that sounds good but means absolutely nothing. Then you combine that with the quote-unquote safe option of trying to focus on everything at once. You want to please everyone, right? And yeah, it might feel like you're being comprehensive, but what it really is a guaranteed path to mediocrity. And I'm not kidding about the scale of this failure. It is absolutely staggering. This isn't some small niche problem. We're talking about studies that consistently show that somewhere between 60 and 90%, 90, of all corporate strategies fail to get implemented properly. I mean, think about that. The plans are made, the fancy PowerPoints are presented, and then crickets. Nothing really changes. And so often the failure begins right at the top. It starts with vision statements that sound exactly like this. You read it and you think, wow, that sounds impressive. But what does it actually mean? It's completely meaningless. It gives you zero guidance on what you're supposed to do, and maybe more importantly, what you're not supposed to do when you walk into the office on a Tuesday morning. In fact, it's so common that one study looked at over 125 company vision statements and found they all just pull from the same small handful of generic buzzwords. It's like a game of corporate Mad Libs, you know? Companies just slot in words like innovative or leading, and they end up with a statement that you literally could not distinguish from any of their competitors. And here's what that vagueness really means in the real world. The impact is huge. According to some great research by Bain & Company, less than 5% of vision statements give people enough clear direction to actually help them make decisions day to day. For the other 95%, well, that vision is just a pretty poster on the wall. Okay, so the big question is, if we know this doesn't work, if we know these vague do-everything strategies are a recipe for failure, why do so many incredibly smart leaders fall into the exact same trap over and over again? Well, the answer really comes down to some very basic, very human psychology. Yeah, there's just this massive gap between what leaders think they're doing and what's actually happening. They think they're being comprehensive, covering all the bases. But what's really happening, they're just writing a strategic wish list. They think they're creating this inclusive plan that everyone can get behind. But really, they're just avoiding the hard, necessary choices. And they think they're being proactive and in control, but they're just mistaking a flurry of activity for actual progress. So let's dig into that psychology a little bit. Why does this happen? Well, for one, trying to cover all your bases just feels safer, right? You're not betting the farm on one big idea. It's also politically safe inside the company, and everything strategy means no department head feels left out or offended, and launching a ton of new initiatives gives you this illusion of control. It feels like you're making progress. But the reality is, this approach totally backfires. It just creates cognitive overload and spreads your resources so thin that nothing, and I mean nothing, gets the attention it needs to actually succeed. And you can see the result of this right on the ground, with the employees. Get this, research shows that a whopping 76% of employees spend less than 3 hours a week on actual strategic work. Let me say that again, less than 3 hours. That's about 7.5% of a typical 40-hour week. And why? It's because they are completely buried under a mountain of competing priorities that all stem from that unfocused, do-everything strategy. And all of this leads to what you could call the jack of all trades trap. You know the saying, jack of all trades, master of none. Well, for a whole company, that approach is a guaranteed recipe for failure. The market doesn't reward mediocrity. It rewards focus. It rewards companies that are the best at something specific. When you try to be everything to everyone,
You end up being nothing special to anyone.
Okay, so this isn't just a problem for big corporations with thousands of employees. Let's actually zoom in a bit and shift our focus to smaller, owner-operated businesses. Because here, the whole problem of strategic failure gets even more intense and a lot more personal.
Yeah, for entrepreneurs, there's this really fascinating thing that happens, what we call the owner-operator paradox. See, the very same instincts that helped them build a successful business from scratch, being opportunistic, reacting fast, being able to pivot on a dime, those very traits can actually become their biggest strategic weakness once the business starts to grow and needs more discipline. And what this paradox creates is a state of constant strategic whiplash. The team thinks they have a plan, but then the owner comes in on Monday with a brand new brilliant idea. Then on Wednesday, they hear one customer complaint and want to change everything. And by Friday, they've read some article and the company's direction shifts again. It's this constant churn that leaves the entire team feeling dizzy and totally confused.
Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine an airplane taking off. If the pilot makes a tiny 5-degree deviation in navigation, it doesn't seem like a big deal at first. But over the course of a long flight, that tiny deviation can cause the plane to land hundreds of miles off course. And it's the exact same thing with these small, impulsive course corrections from an owner. They seem minor in the moment, but they compound over time, and before you know it, the whole company is way off strategy, nowhere near its intended destination. Yeah, inside these companies, people often call these the God-given initiative problem. Why? Because the ideas come straight from the owner at the top, and nobody can question them. See, unlike a corporate CEO who has a board to answer to, an owner often has no external accountability. Their emotional attachment to the business can completely override rational strategy, and they get distracted by shiny object syndrome, always chasing the next new thing instead of focusing on the core goals. So, okay, we've seen how this is a huge systemic problem, whether you're in a corporate boardroom or running a small business on Main Street. But here's the good news. It is absolutely not hopeless. There's a really clear way to break this destructive pattern. The antidote to all this dilution really comes down to a disciplined 3-part approach, and it works for any size organization. First, you need brutal prioritization. That's having the guts to decide what you will not do. Second is strategic specificity. This is about making your vision actionable, not just a bunch of aspirational fluff. And finally, you lock it all in with strategic governance, putting systems in place that hold absolutely everyone, from the new intern all the way up to the owner, accountable to that plan. When you boil it all down, it's really a fundamental choice between two totally different mindsets. On one side, you've got the everything strategy. This is where being busy feels like progress, and you're chasing every single opportunity because you're afraid of missing out. Then, on the other side, you have the focused strategy. This is where progress is measured. It's intentional. This mindset understands that real power doesn't come from what you do, it comes from what you bravely choose not to do. It's the difference between a wishy-washy vision and one that actually tells people what to do. One path pretty much guarantees you'll be mediocre. The other, well, that one opens the door to real, lasting differentiation and success. And that brings us to the one final, really critical question you need to ask. Ask yourself, ask your team, ask your boss. Take a hard look at your current strategic plan. Is it a real roadmap? Does it give you clear directions telling you exactly which roads to take and, just as important, which roads to avoid? Or is it just a wish list, a collection of all the wonderful places you hope to end up someday, with no real plan to get there? Because honestly, the answer to that question makes all the difference in the world.